people that come together to provide a collaborative space for people to do DIY, home automation, microcontrollers, 3D printing, and other various things. We're made up of people from Google, Spaywar, Boeing, and also students from Trident Tech, the Citadel, or like myself, the College of Charleston. It's no accident that our mission statement is why we're having this presentation here today, because Dr. Upton recognizes that when people that are makers and hackers and DIY kind of people get together, incredible levels of learning can be achieved. So Dr. Upton, a graduate of University of Cambridge, technical director of Broadcom. He's worked at Intel and IBM, and most importantly for this speech, he is the founder and executive director of the Raspberry Pi Foundation. It's my pleasure to introduce the man behind Raspberry Pi, Dr. Upton.
Thank you. It's really great to be here in Charleston. I should say, as an avid Falling Skies viewer, it's nice to see it's not been nuked flat by aliens, so that's good. I run a thing called the Raspberry Pi. As we heard, I run a thing called the Raspberry Pi Foundation, based out of Cambridge in the UK, and we make this thing, which is a Raspberry Pi. Now I'm going to pass that around for, I'm guessing you've already seen that, but for those of you who've not seen one yet, I thought I'd just pass that around, a non-functional mechanical sample of the Raspberry Pi. I used to take functional mechanical samples, but I didn't always used to come back to them. I guess what I thought I'd do today, I'll talk a little bit about why we made the Raspberry Pi, what the realization was that we had in Cambridge that caused us to think doing something like Raspberry Pi would be a good idea. A little bit about the history of the project. It's been a long road to get to where we are, and you know, we've had some fun adventures along the way. I might talk about that a little bit. I speculate a little bit about the future. I also have a deck of, I guess, the thing that's happened over the last few months is we have a website that talks about where we disseminate information about Raspberry Pi. What's happened over the last few months is that the character of that website has changed from being primarily us talking about what we've been doing to us talking about what other people have been doing with the Raspberry Pi as they've gone out into the world. So I have some examples of my favourite things that have happened over the first 6 months of the shipments of Raspberry Pi. So Raspberry Pi for me started in about 2006. I was finishing my PhD at the University of Cambridge, and as part of that I was working as what's called a Director of Studies. And the Director of Studies role in the Cambridge system is to organise undergraduate teaching, and also to go out and interview high school kids to try and find new undergraduates for the next year. It was a really depressing experience, actually. When I came up to Cambridge in 1996, we probably had about 6 applicants for every place. That's a fairly typical Cambridge application ratio. All the courses, physics, maths, like to be oversubscribed by that kind of ratio because it gives the academics a good opportunity to pick out the very best students to come and study on the course. We were oversubscribed by about 6 to 1. And of those people, certainly all the people we let in, and I think probably a very large number, having met people who went to other universities at the same time, a very large number of the people we didn't let in, had a very deep understanding of computers at the point where they came in the door. They were coming in for interview at 16 and 17. They already knew how to program in one or more assembly languages. Many of them had been doing kind of often graphics hacking, given the nature of the time. They'd been doing graphics hacking on 8 and 16-bit microcomputers. And in fact, the very first thing we had to do when we brought these people in the door was to break them down. To kind of convince them they didn't know everything. Those computer scientists in the room, we had this wonderful tool that we call functional programming, which is a fantastic way of brutalising an 18-year-old and convincing him that he really doesn't know everything, that there's more to computer science than assembly language. And so the Cambridge course is it's a very short course. You have about, in any given academic year, you have about 20 weeks of contact time. You have 2 8-week terms and a 4-week half term. You have 3 of those years. At the end of those 60 weeks of contact time, your high school student is now expected to be able to start a UK PhD program. And the UK PhD program is shorter than the US PhD, but it's a 3-year program. So the expectation is that you can turn a high school student into a PhD into PhD starter in 60 weeks. Now, it was extremely useful for us that we could rely on this very high level of talent coming in the door, this very high level not just of intelligence, but high level of skill, high level of learning coming in the door, because it meant that we could short-circuit a whole bunch of introductory material. We could take things for granted. We grew very, very, I think as a department, through the 1980s and 90s, we'd grown extremely fat and happy on the back of this stream of really talented people. Now, by the time I was interviewing people in the mid-2000s, there were half the number. So we were still have about 80 places. We'd gone from having 500 applicants to having 250 applicants. Now that's still kind of all right. You know, it's not too bad. But it's certainly starting to look a little bit lean, certainly by Cambridge standards. The much more worrying thing was, of the people who we let in, a significant number of them had never done anything significantly more complicated than writing a web page with a computer. What this meant was that a lot of that first year, where we were supposed to be getting up to speed fast, we were having to spend bringing people up to a level of skill that we'd previously been able to assume. This is putting enormous stress on the structure of the course. Subsequently has tended to push, in a lot of courses, including the Cambridge one, has pushed it into a 4-year course, simply as material that falls off the end of the 3rd year falls into a 4th year. So this was an enormous problem for us, and a group of us started to look around for reasons why this might have happened. And what we came up with was the idea that we started to look at why people in the mid-90s, these applicants in the mid-90s, knew how to program computers. And of course, the answer is we all had computers in our bedrooms as children that we could program. Now, I had a machine called a BBC microcomputer. Anyone heard of the BBC microcomputer? Yeah, very minority interest, never really broke America. I mean, substitute TRS-80 in US terms. We had, there is some overlap between the two sets of computers. We had Commodore 64s as well. We had the Timex was a US licensed version of a machine that we called the ZX Spectrum. So there was some overlap, but then each country had its own computers. But we all had these computers, and we didn't necessarily buy them to learn to program on. Right, you maybe bought a BBC Micro to do your schoolwork on. You maybe went out and bought a Timex in order to play games on, or a Commodore 64 to play games on. But what they all had in common was you turn them on and they go beep, and they give you a basic prompt. And you can do a lot of other stuff with them. But the first thing you have to do with these machines is you have to choose not to program. And virtually everyone I know, all of my contemporaries, knew that 2-line program 10 print I am great 20 go to 10 or something filthier than that, and then we used to go into stores, we used to go into Radio Shack and type this into all of the machines and then run all the machines and then run out the door and leave the clerks running around with their hair on fire. And what this meant was that everyone my age in the UK, I think this is kind of true in the US as well, everyone my age who had an aptitude for computing had a chance to discover that they had an aptitude for computing, and had a chance, once they discovered it, if they wanted to pursue it and develop it. And certainly my introduction to computing, I had been programming computers for 10 years before anyone thought about teaching me to program computers. And this we believe was the source of this stream of very talented kids that we were able to exploit to get an easy life for ourselves in the computer laboratory. In the early 1990s, a number of bad things happened. So this ecosystem of easily programmable 8-bit microcomputers was eaten from kind of 2 directions. It was eaten from below by games consoles. Now, games consoles are unprogrammable, and worse than being unprogrammable, they're designed to be unprogrammable. They have to be unprogrammable, because they're usually sold at a loss, and therefore their business model requires the platform holder control who can write software for it. So that kind of killed the bottom end, the people who've been buying computers, programmable hardware in order to play games on. Now, from the top end, it was killed by the PC and various other more sophisticated general-purpose computers. Now, those are awesomely programmable machines. The PC is a more programmable machine than any machine I had when I was a child. But the difference is that you have to choose to program it. It's a machine that you have to make a positive decision to program. You have to make a positive decision to go out and get tools. That's reasonably straightforward today. It wasn't. I think there was a period of time. There was a period of 5 to 10 years before broadband internet, where going and getting those and the widespread availability of free programming languages, when in fact it was hard to go and get those tools. I remember when I moved from a BBC Micro to an Amiga, I had to go and spend quite a lot of money on an assembler in order to be able to continue hacking. So, eaten from below by games consoles, eaten from above by the PC. And by the kind of the inversion of the choice architecture with the PC, from you have to choose not to program, that's the first thing you do when you turn the machine on, to you have to choose to you have to choose to program when you turn the machine on. So this group of us started wondering whether there was something we could do to kind of try and reboot some of this culture that we'd had in the 1980s. And we wondered whether we could produce a platform, a hardware platform, which could go into children's bedrooms and fill some of that niche that had previously been filled by the 8-bit microcomputers. We had this idea it had to do 4 things. It had to be interesting. It had to not just be a programming platform. That we early on we thought about various ways of making cheap hardware, which basically was just there to program. It kind of booted into a programming language and gave you maybe Python or Lua or one of these scripting languages. But the problem is that in the 1980s, these machines that we were used to using, they were people didn't necessarily buy them to program on. People bought them for some other thing, and then they used them to program. So we wanted a thing which was actually to appeal to children. We wanted a thing which was interesting to children, which had some non-programming use. And in our minds, that meant games, it meant media. So we wanted to have a platform which was reasonably powerful from a media standpoint. We wanted to have a platform which was robust. You know, this is something that's supposed to be able to go backwards and forwards between a child's bedroom and school, and a child's bedroom and school 100 times, be shoved into a school bag and pulled out again, and it doesn't break. So we wanted something that was robust. And for us, that kind of probably implied small. We wanted something, obviously, that was programmable. We wanted something that we could bundle virtually every programming tool that you've ever heard of onto. From GCC from maybe Scratch and Logo for 5-year-olds, up to Python, all the usual scripting languages, GCC, various odd languages, functional programming, so that people don't necessarily first meet it when they come into Cambridge. So we wanted it to be programmable, and finally we wanted it to be cheap. By cheap, we thought a textbook would be a good benchmark for the cost of the device. So we thought $25 be a good cost. Now that merely indicates that we've got no idea how much textbooks cost. I think if we'd had a more accurate understanding of what textbooks cost, we would have had a much easier time making Raspberry Pi. But yeah, we picked $25 as our target. And from 2006 onwards, a number of us, kind of individually and as a group, were kind of looking to see what we could build in this sort of price point. And the first things that we built were unsuitable for a variety of reasons. The very first thing I built was quite Arduino-like. I guess most of you are familiar with the Arduino platform, based on a microcontroller chip with a very small amount of memory. Kind of met the cheap and programmable requirements, but didn't really meet the interesting for something other than programmable. It was just a programmable machine. In fact, in terms of performance, it was very similar to the 8-bit microcontroller that I had as a child. I went to work for a company called Broadcom when I finished my time at university. Broadcom in Cambridge makes graphics chips for mobile phones. And looking at these graphics chips for mobile phones, what we found was they cost about the same as a microcontroller, except you can't buy them unless you're a giant cell phone company. Now, but looking at them, we started to think, man, wouldn't it be great if we could get our hands on these, if we'd exploit our relationship with Broadcom to get our hands on this hardware, and get it out into, and build some sort of platform on it. By about 2008, I think we'd convinced ourselves that we could do something in this area, and we incorporated the Raspberry Pi Foundation as a British not-for-profit to pursue this. By 2010, we actually had arranged for there to be a Broadcom chip which was very suitable for our needs. I was on the chip design team, so you know. So we were very lucky that this chip just happened to appear that had exactly the right feature set. We were kind of pottering along at our own pace. We were trying to solve a very parochial little local problem, which is we wanted another 50 good computer scientists for Cambridge in the UK. That's what we wanted. And so our idea of scale, our idea for this great world-bestriding project was that we would try and build 1,000 computers. And we were going to build these, and we were maybe going to give them away. One of the nice things with these is if we could build them at the cost we were interested in, we could give them away at open days. We have open days in June of the penultimate year of school. People in their penultimate year come to the open days, and then in their final year, in December, so 6 months later, they come back and they have an interview. And we had this idea that we could take these units and give them away, and when the people came in for interview, we could say, what did you do with that free computer we gave you 6 months ago? And if the people said nothing, then we probably don't want to admit them to read computer science at Cambridge. And that was just a nice little potted thing that would be helpful to us in screening as much as anything, not even increasing the size of the pool, just doing more effective screening of our 250 people to spot the people who had the kind of homebrew hacking kind of thing that we used to be able to spot by saying, show us your graphics demo. So that was our idea of scale. And we very much, because we were nostalgic, we very much wanted to have the BBC brand on it. The British Broadcasting Corporation, in the My BBC Micro, was a machine which was sponsored, the creation of it was sponsored by the British National Broadcaster. It's kind of a remarkable idea. I don't think that's really happened anywhere else in the world. And we had this idea that we could try and put the BBC brand on it. Now, unfortunately, a lot of stuff has changed in the last 30 years that restricts the BBC's freedom of action. And it isn't really any longer able to stick its brand on a piece of hardware and go and compete in the commercial market, because it's a state-backed entity, right? There are rules about what state-backed entities can do in Europe. And so it couldn't put its name on it. And our very last gasp attempt to get the BBC name on, we went to see their senior technology correspondent back in May of last year. And we asked him, and he said no. And what he did say though was, could I take some video of you just holding it up, not running it, because it was a scarcely functional prototype that we took. Could I just take a picture of you holding it up and talking about what you're trying to do, what it is? And one of my fellow trustees stood up on camera for 45 seconds, recorded a little piece, and Rory, a journalist, put it on his blog. We had 600,000 YouTube views in 2 days. Right, and that was a really fantastic 2 days, because that number just kept going up on YouTube, and it's, you know how it is when you get something that's like taking off online and you're sitting there pressing F5 and watching your number go up and feeling really popular and your head's getting bigger. And at the end of those 2 days, Liz and I, my wife Liz at the back, Liz and I sat down across the dinner table from each other, and we realised that we promised 600,000 people that we'd build them a $25 computer. That was really awful. So kind of since last May, my life and Liz's life and the life of a few other people since last May has been about trying to, while doing our day jobs, for most of us, trying to make good on this promise that we accidentally made, that we were going to make 600,000 people a $25 computer. Now, we made a number of really good decisions early on. One of them was to try and be as open as possible about, try and be as open as possible about the journey that we were going on. So we set up a blog. We already owned all the domain names we needed. We set up a blog, set up some forums, and we started blogging about, Liz is a freelance journalist by profession, and she stopped doing freelance journalism and just ran our social media web operation from about July of last year onwards. And we started writing about everything that we were doing. Very, very open. And it's been, that turned out to be in many ways, a really fantastic decision, because we got an enormous amount of engagement and support and encouragement. You know, when things were looking bad, you know, people would just write, we still get, I mean, people write to us pretty much every day saying, you know, just encouraging words. And we've had that from very early on. We attracted many of the people who are the kind of core members of our community team, found us within a month or so of the announcement of the project through the website. It's almost as if people were waiting for the existence of something like this, and people battened onto it very rapidly. So that's been nice. I mean, downsides of it, you know, you do get a lot of trolls, you do get a lot of random abuse, particularly on Twitter. You also, by writing about what you're trying to do, in particular writing about your target dates for accomplishing stuff, you provide journalists with an infinite stream of the Raspberry Pi's late type headlines. You know, we said we were going to try and get it out in the fourth quarter of last year. That somehow very rapidly got averaged down to the 15th of November. And on the 16th of November, I saw my very first The Raspberry Pi is Late headline. And that's kind of like, it's nice, but it's a little stressful from time to time. But we were pottering along, and yeah, it was clear that we had more demand. We had more than 1,000 units of demand. Now, we're a not-for-profit, which means we can't sell shares in ourselves. That meant all of the capital that we needed to build this stuff, to build these units, had to come from the trustees. So we were able to scrape together. We scraped together in the end from the trustees and from some high net worth individuals in the Cambridge area about $250,000, and that's enough to build about 10,000 Raspberry Pis. And we thought, you know, 10,000, that'll be good. That'll keep us going for a month. You know, 600,000 people here. Most of them are just rubbernecking. You know, only a very small proportion of those will actually be interested in buying Raspberry Pis. So we'll build 10,000. We'll see how it goes. and then we will, we'll begin towards the end of 7 days, we've recovered some of our capital, we'll build another 10,000. Now, we did in the end manage to sell 10 units in the fourth quarter of last year. We did an NVIDIA-style paper launch on the 31st of December. We sold 10 units on eBay for an average of about $1,000. An average of about $1,500 each. So there was enough interest, and that gave us some clue that there was a lot of interest in this device. The second thing was, while we then engaged a Chinese contract manufacturer to go and build them in some volume. Went out and bought some chips. Engaged a Chinese contract manufacturer, and to keep people busy during the surprisingly long wait while the 3 weeks that they quoted us for building this turned into 10 weeks, after we paid. We thought, well, we're going to keep the community enthused and excited. What we'll do is we'll take a root file system image. Now this device boots off an SD card. And what we'll do is we'll take an SD card image and we'll put that online so people can have a look at it and see what a Raspberry Pi SD card image looks like. Put it on our website. We had 50 to 60,000 downloads of the thing over a couple of days. And that was the point where we realized that not just the people who are interested in Raspberry Pi, the people so hardcore that they would download a beta quality operating system image for a machine that they had no idea when they were going to be able to buy it, was 50 to 60,000 people. And that was when we really knew we were screwed, right? And we were very lucky at this time because we were able to, so we were kind of this little crippled by a corporate structure on this capacity-constrained manufacturing company. We were constrained by our supply of capital, and our supply of capital was constrained by our corporate structure. Now, we were extremely lucky that we found at that time 2 UK-listed companies, multi-billion-dollar listed companies called Electric Components and Premier Farnell, who trade over here as Allied and Newark. They also perceived the same problem we perceived, which is that the decline in technical skills is a threat to national competitiveness. It's a complete disaster, particularly for a little country like Britain, who's used up all of our coal and oil. I mean, you guys have got natural resources to fall back on. We burnt all our natural resources in the Industrial Revolution, and in the 1970s we found some more under the sea, and now we've burnt all of that as well. So if we don't get smart and stay smart, we're doomed. And these companies are electronic component distributors. They rely on there being a load of engineers, so that there are a load of engineers to buy their stuff. And so they perceive both as sort of a charitable and a self-interest argument for increasing the number, for helping us achieve our goals, helping us achieve our educational goals. And what they were prepared to do, as it turned out, was not just distribute the devices in the same way that maybe DigiKey distribute BeagleBoards. They were prepared to provide the capital to build them, manage the manufacturing process in southern China, do all of the distribution and all of the customer support, and pay us a royalty. So what this did at a stroke was to turn us from, in the period between the middle of January, when we realised how screwed we were, and the end of February when we launched, we turned from being a capital-constrained manufacturing company into a scale-free IP licensing company that just owns the design of the board, owns the trademark, develops the board, promotes the trademark, and licenses those two things to our 2 manufacturing and distribution partners. And so these guys have really made this work at scale, and they made it work at scale very, very quickly. We launched it on the 29th of February.
Briefly, how your textbook pricing, did they push back on you at all on that, or did they buy in immediately?
They bought in immediately because there is actually there's enough margin. So there's not enormous amounts of margin. There's less margin. There's less than their corporate target margin in that, but not all that much less. So they were happy about that, and I think they perceived that a big part of our pitch was the price. That it is actually an enormously powerful device, but that really the thing that really differentiates it from other attempts to do similar things is the price point. And so they've been incredibly supportive of both price points, of both the $25 price point of the bare bones version, which we've in fact yet to launch, and the $35 price point of this version, which has a built-in hardened Ethernet control. So we launched on the 29th of February. This was a really stupid idea. No first anniversary celebrations. We're going to have a crazy 4th anniversary celebration. Going to save up all of our money. We sold 100,000 units in the first day. We took down both companies' websites for several hours. The 2 companies together are dominate the UK electronic component distribution landscape. And so by taking the fact that their websites went offline briefly prevented all engineers in Britain from buying resistors for a period of 4 or 5 hours. They were both, though, it was a really interesting study in how a company deals over a course of a few hours with this kind of catastrophic spike. We were more popular, we outtrended Lady Gaga for about 3 hours. And yeah, I mean, subsequently dropped back to the noise floor, right? I mean, she's still up there. But, I mean, both companies actually were able to get their IT departments over the course of a couple of hours entirely focused on how they bring their website back up while continuing to take orders. Took 100,000 orders in the first day. Subsequently, obviously, took some months to fulfill those 100,000 orders because, supply chain issues. One thing that really did bite us, we hadn't really appreciated the absolute requirement for FCC and for EMC certification of these boards. There has historically been a kind of a light touch regulatory environment that means if you're making small numbers of development boards, both in the US and the EU, if you sell electronic hardware, you must get it certified for electromagnetic compatibility. There's typically a soft touch regulatory regime, which means that they don't care too much until you've sold a few thousand units. We had the profile of a giant computer company before we'd sold a single unit, and therefore we found after the 29th of February that the units that we had coming in from China were not certified. And we were very lucky that they turned out to be certifiable, because obviously you can't test a board into compliance. A board is either compliant or it isn't compliant. So we were fortunate, we were very lucky, that the existing off-the-shelf design made it actually through with quite a large amount of margin, made it through conformance testing. So that caused a delay. First units started to trickle out of the door in early April. We're now 6 and a bit months in. We have sold about 400,000 units. There's still a backlog with one of our distributors. We're very hopeful we're going to sell 1 million units within, probably not this calendar year, but probably certainly by the end of February. So in our first 12 months, we will have sold 1 million units. And we're starting to see, as you'll see in a moment, we're starting to see some really interesting stuff being done. And most importantly, we're starting to see stuff being done in the area we care about, which is education. We're starting to see kids using it. And that's really, really encouraging. And we're not going to know, our idea that this will reboot computing education is on the level of a hypothesis. I mean, we're actually shying away a little bit from asserting that we're right. We're just saying, this is our best guess as to what's wrong, and this is our best guess as to what we might do about fixing the problem. So we're not going to know for 5 years, 10 years, whether we've made any impact on the problem. It's part of the problem from the point of view of getting the government interested in this in the UK, is that this problem is a pipeline problem. So you're filling a pipeline with 11-year-old children, right? And then 10 years later, they start falling out at the end as 21-year graduates and falling out into industry. And the horrible thing about it, well, the nice and the horrible thing about this is you can stop pouring children into this pipeline. For 10 years, people keep coming out the other end, and the government is happy, and everyone is happy. And then one day, you wake up and you've got no one. I mean, if I go to work, I still work for Broadcom. If I go into work and I look around at the number of 30-something people and the number of 20-something people, the contrast is staggering and worrying. Increasingly for us at Broadcom, recruitment means poaching mature mid-career engineers from other people rather than recruiting graduates, simply because we're all fighting over this tiny little pool of remaining graduates. So the problem is not only do you not have anyone coming in, but if you want to reboot the system, it takes you 10 years because you've got to fill the pipeline up again. And so I think it's going to take us a while to know whether we were right. But we are at least seeing cool stuff. So let me share with you my slideshow of cool stuff. And then perhaps I can take any questions that you have about the project. Okay, first a few things people are doing with it. Music. This is a 4-note polyphony digital analog synth that you called Piano, that you can run on the Pi. It's being developed by somebody in Britain. It's actually going to be a closed source product. It's actually going to be a commercial product based on the Pi. There are some wonderful, if you Google, I think it's Raspberry Pi synthesizer. I think he's got a Raspberry Pi synthesizer.blogspot. He's got some wonderful videos of him playing music on this thing, and it's a really, really convincing, Korga-like, digital Korga-like synth. We actually think that once this is currently all running on the ARM, the ARM represents, because this chip has a kind of a graphics processor heritage, the ARM actually represents a tiny fraction of the compute capability on the device. So we believe that once we bring some more of that to bear on the problem, you should be able to get 16 node polyphony, a much more sophisticated simulation, a much higher frequency, more sophisticated simulation of the synth. So that's cute. Beer. An enormous number of people are using this as a beer controller. Not just homebrew people, but small craft breweries using this as a platform for, as in its entirety as a platform, or as part of a platform for controlling the environment in which beer is brewed, getting a repeatable environment for brewing beer. There's a platform just being open source called BrewPi, which uses an Arduino and a Raspberry Pi together to provide a web services like API for doing brewing, so you can as a web service serves you a nice grasp of what the temperature of your mash has been. Penguins. We said it was important to. We thought it was important for this to be interesting to kids. What we've ended up with, again, because of the GPU heritage of the platform, we ended up with a device that has an amount of 3D performance somewhere between that of a PlayStation 2 and a PlayStation 3, certainly well north of a Nintendo Wii. You can run recognisably modern computer games on this platform. This is not a recognisably modern computer game, but it is. The water effect here is massively expensive to render. It's a nice illustration of the fact we can do really cute 3D graphics on here, and we do expect over the next few months. We're very hopeful that we'll start to see real commercial quality games on there, because we think that is actually important. There's a balance. If you make it too much fun, then maybe people will only use it to have fun on. But I think that there is a role for games content and other entertainment content in getting this into children's hands, making this interesting. I hope many of you have heard of it. There's a company called Adafruit who do a lot of work in the electronic hobbyist area in the US. Adafruit have really taken Pi to their hearts, and every Friday is Pi Day on Adafruit. This is not an example of something running on the Pi, I'm told, but they have ported this project onto the Pi. It's a persistence of vision hack. You wave this strip of LEDs around and paint lights in the sky. But yeah, I mean, they've been extremely useful. We as an organisation are still very lightweight. We don't really have any employees. And so we've been very reliant on partnerships like this to drive interest in the Pi in places like the US where we don't have a permanent presence. We try and send people over as much as we can. Sort of thing has been very useful. Fish. This is a thing called Fish Pi. It's an attempt to build an autonomous, very early picture of an attempt. It's a tough word. You could chuck it off an ocean liner, maybe, and bomb around in the sea. It's an attempt to build an autonomous build ship that will sail around the North Atlantic doing stuff. There's a Kickstarter project for this one. Interesting to see how this one goes, but this one has actually happened. That's a picture of taken from about 40 kilometres above southern England. It's from a weather balloon and sent down in real time. So Pi now holds the record for the highest altitude pictures ever sent down from an amateur platform in real time. So people have sent things up before. There's a very vibrant community of people who string digital compact cameras under weather balloons and send them up in the air and then recover them afterwards and extract the SD card and get pictures. These pictures are actually sent down in real time using a webcam plus Pi plus radio transmitter set up, and the packets were being received as far away as Northern Ireland, reassembled and then stitched together to make that. The lovely thing about this from our point of view, from an educational point of view, is this is within the price range of every high school in the world, in the developed world. Right? There is no school that couldn't do this as a science project. It's very, very simple to build. Everyone could be getting pictures from the edge of space. And I think this, I'm an old space cadet, so maybe I think that this is more exciting than it is, but I think this is very cute. We have some initial indication that people are going to try and put these in sounding rockets, in CubeSats, maybe not on the moon, maybe not on Mars, but at least in low Earth orbit. We have some GPIO on the device up in the corner there, 0.1 inch pin strip. This for me was very much an afterthought, because although I'm an ASIC engineer, my job is as an ASIC engineer. I'm actually a software guy by background, and therefore I thought the cool stuff people would be doing with this platform would be software. We put GPI on here as a little bit of an afterthought. It's turned out, of course, that most of the interesting things people have been doing, at least initially, have been these physical computing things, these Arduino-like physical computing things. We have 3v3, reasonably robust 3v3 I/O. There are a number of, the foundation isn't producing add-on boards, with a couple of exceptions. We're not producing add-on boards, but there are a number of third parties who have already done really interesting ones. This one called Gert board gives you 5V, heavily buffered 5V I/O, gives you the ability to drive sort of 3 or 4 amp motors, and also gives you some element of Arduino compatibility, which is kind of handy. If you want more than some element of Arduino compatibility, there are a lot of people, as I mentioned in the BrewPi thing, there are a lot of people using this device with Arduino. So you can plug the Arduino's USB port into our USB port, and then it makes an extremely good I/O expander, kind of soft, it's not perfectly isolated, but it's reasonably isolated from us. And also, so I/O expander, analog input, and so they make a great platform together. There's been an attempt, I think, in the press sometimes to set us up in opposition to Arduino as kind of a competitor to Arduino. I think there are some things that people do with Arduino, particularly when you find people who are building systems with Arduino where they stack up lots and lots and lots of shields on top of an Arduino to get, an Ethernet shield, and where after a while you've spent, $300 on Arduino hardware, and you could have done it on a Pi. So I think there is a little set of things that you're better off doing on the Pi. I think actually the majority of things you're still better off doing on the Arduino, because it's a little cheaper than us, it's a lower power than us. If you're prepared to put up with having to do some programming and upload it onto the Arduino and run it on the Arduino, then I'm very hopeful that our distributors are going to start selling paired, going to start selling bundles, because I think it actually makes, we're a good complement to the Arduino. We believe that we can potentially help Arduino sell more Arduinos, not fewer. I did say we weren't going to build add-on boards, but there is one we're building. This is a camera board. The reason we're building this is because you need to make modifications to the microcode that runs on the GPU in order to drive the camera correctly. This is actually a 14 megapixel camera. The board that we're intending to release is a 5 megapixel camera, and we're very, very hopeful that we'll be able to get that out of the door for under $25. Now, the magic thing about $25 is that means you'll be able to take a Model A, the low-end Raspberry Pi, and the camera board and get out the door for under $50. And we think that there's an enormous number of low-power, remote sensing applications that this is going to enable. That there's currently no platform that can deliver that. I wrote a book. Which I kind of feel I ought to pimp, but also refuse to pimp on moral grounds. But I did write a book. I mean, the nice thing is, currently that's about the only book. But the really nice thing is there are other books in the works, and we are starting to get to a point now. An important part of a platform like this is the ecosystem of books and support material around it. We have indications that a lot of publishers are working on Raspberry Pi content. We're really looking forward to an environment where there is, just as today there's an Arduino section in the computer bit of your bookstore, there'll be a Raspberry Pi section. We think we can get there in the next year or so. Jam. There's this thing called Raspberry Jam. One of the challenges in getting Raspberry Pi into education is that there are a lot of teachers who are not particularly au fait with, who want to be au fait with teaching programming, teaching computer science as distinct from using Word and Excel, but who don't have the background. Fortunately, there are a lot of teachers who do have the background. Now, Raspberry Jam is this kind of thing that has autonomously arisen in the UK without really much assistance from the foundation, and it's a kind of a collective of local gatherings, which are kind of partway between being a computer club, a user group, a conference, a training session, in which people just arrive somewhere like this and talk about, bring their Raspberry Pis with them and talk about what they've been doing with their Pis with each other and share knowledge. And also people who know nothing about the Raspberry Pi but are interested in either getting involved in it for personal reasons or interested in teaching people about it can come and ask for support. These are going on every week pretty much in the UK now. There have been a few on the west coast of the US, some in Australia. From our point of view, the two great things about this: one, they massively increase the usability of Pi as an educational platform. Two, it's nothing to do with us. Really, really valuable. There's an enormously enthusiastic and energetic guy called Alan O'Donoghue who runs these, and yeah, we love it. Another example of community stuff, I remember back in the 80s buying computer magazines, and a fixture of computer magazines was the type-in listing. And there's something wonderful about typing in, if you type in a computer program, then it kind of goes through your eyes and through your brain, out of your fingers and into the computer, and somehow that makes it yours a little bit more. It encourages you to want to modify it. It gives you permission to modify it, gives you encouragement to modify it. Typically you make mistakes, and by making mistakes you often learn something interesting about the computer. Magpie is a community-produced magazine for Raspberry Pi, produced by the user community in the UK, and they are it's on its 6th issue. It's a monthly magazine. The nice thing about issue 6, this is issue 5, the nice thing about issue 6 is there's a print version. It's been an electronic only, PDF only until now. They've now gone to print. And the reason they've gone to print is because teachers want to have something they can leave lying around in the lab at school that people can pick up and flick through. So they're selling these in really quite substantial numbers in printed form as of last week. The Pi as we sell it is just this thing. That's what the foundation makes. What our partners make. We didn't put a box on it. The reason we didn't put a box on it was we thought we were only going to sell 1,000 of them. So we didn't think it was worth. And then when we thought we were going to sell more than 1,000 of them, every spare penny we had gone into buying chips. So setting up injection molding costs a good bit of money. Setting up an injection molding is like sort of a $10,000, $15,000 exercise. We didn't think it was going to be worth it, and then after we realised it would be worth it, we couldn't afford it. But it's been fantastic, because by leaving this kind of gap, by leaving this space, by not rushing in and claiming all the value around the Pi, just as we don't do expansion boards, we don't do cases, we've created this entire ecosystem of people who case Raspberry Pis. And it's a very robust and reasonably profitable ecosystem. Obviously not this one, this is the Punit. So people have gone for all the niches, right? This is the free niche. This is a PDF that you can print out on the thickest card that you're able to push through whatever printer you have, and you fold it up and you get a Raspberry Pi case. Actually remarkably functional and completely safe Raspberry Pi case. We have taken the hottest Raspberry Pi we were able to get out of the factory and put it in one of these, and then put it in a cupboard to see whether we could set it on fire or scorch it. Legos. The size of the Raspberry Pi was determined by our desire to be able to say it's the size of a credit card. So we took the ISO spec for a credit card. We've ended up with about 1 mil in each direction. It's 1 mil bigger in one dimension and 1 mil smaller in another dimension. Completely by chance, we ended up with a size which is a very neat multiple of the Lego basis unit size. This means that cases like this fit the Pi incredibly snugly and actually give you a really nice casing experience. This one was designed by a girl called Biz in the UK, who is 11 years old. She is a Girl Scout. It is now possible to go online and buy this case, buy a kit to make this case from a Lego store whose name I forget, and she gets royalties. And because she's 11 years old and she likes Lego, she is elected to receive her royalties in Lego. So she now has more Lego than any child in the United Kingdom. I mean, this is a really nice example of the Scouts, a non-state education organisation, voluntary organisation, where individual Scoutmasters have decided that they're interested in computers and they think their kids will be interested in computers, and have gone and got some Raspberry Pis and done stuff. This is one of those. At the other end of the scale, we have this thing called Pibo. This is the opposite of the Punit, right? This is the deluxe case. This is made out of a stack of laser etched acrylic. The guy who designed this it's an amazingly beautiful thing when you assemble it. The guy who designed this is actually the guy who designed our logo for us as part of a contest last autumn. He first showed me a prototype of this in July of this year, and there was a little 7-year-old girl walking past. I was at a computer conference, but there'd been a lot of stuff about Raspberry Pi, and he was showing me it, and this little girl's head just like snaps around like that. And she goes, "Is that a Raspberry Pi case?" He goes, "Yeah," and she's like, "Where can I buy it?" And that was how he knew he had it on his hands. Since then, he's gone from a standing start to employing a bunch of people in a bit of economically depressed northern UK. I think we shipped about 7,000 of these or something to date. They're going out the door, and he's got a whole workshop and a bunch of employees, and he's bootstrapped a really nice little manufacturing industry on the back of this. And this is one of the things that makes it nice that we've not gone and grabbed all of the value in this space. He's not the only person to make good money out of it. I mentioned kids. By by and large, I think we have to flood fill the people in this room. We have to sell all of us Raspberry Pis before there are any left for kids. Probably 70 or 80% of the Raspberry Pis that have been sold to date have been going into the hands of adults. Fortunately, some of those adults have children, and so they've been getting their way. They've been finding their way into the hands of children via the adults in their lives. The nice thing is, there've been a lot of engineers who've been using this as a platform to talk to their children about what it is that they do, to talk to children about their enthusiasm for engineering. This kid is called Michael. He's in the UK, and I think he's using MIT. I think off screen there, he's using MIT Scratch, which is our favoured platform for very young children, and he appears to be enjoying it. So he's vaguely mesmerised. You remember we were trying to solve this very parochial problem in the UK. We didn't really care about the rest of the world when we started doing this. Turns out kids in India want to do this as well. This is in Uttar Pradesh in India. Yeah, you can see, as you're not out of shot, these guys are in fact using MIT Scratch. So this is seeing some adoption in the developing world as a platform for education. It's also starting to see some adoption in the developing world as a platform for general purpose computing, because it is just about powerful enough to make a usable PC if you are a family that's just bought your first television. And that was certainly a dynamic that we saw here, I think in the UK and here in the 1980s, was that home computers started off as a peripheral to your television. Your television is still one of the largest pieces of consumer electronics investments that you make. And they started off as a way of getting a little more value out of that investment. So we're seeing that dynamic play out, certainly in India, and to a lesser extent in Brazil at the moment. We're seeing that dynamic play out. We think that there's a lot of potential for Pi over there. To give you an idea of where we are at the moment, this is a map, a nice Google map hack that was written by a 15-year-old kid in the UK. It's a self-registration map, so you can go, when you receive your Pi, you can go on there, register yourself as a Pi owner, give your name and your location. About one in 30 Pis are on, so each dot on here represents about 30 Pis. It's about 7,000 in the UK there, so scale that up. That's about 200,000 units sold in the UK. In the US, still very hot in Northwest Europe. Stronger on the East Coast than the West Coast of the US, which is interesting. Currently, we're selling, the US is now our largest market for Pi. We're shipping about 100,000, that's about 100,000 units a month into the US. That's still not good enough, because there are 5 times as many of you as there are of us, so we need to kind of increase that. We need to kind of get the word out these things exist. We've been very lucky with our mass media, with our mainstream media support in the UK. The mainstream media has really taken an interest in it because it plays, I think, to a nice narrative about the old UK small computer industry. We're weaker. There's some interest in South Africa, some interest down in Australasia. We're weaker than we'd like to be in India. We're weaker than we'd like to be in South America. Both of those are a combination of shipment cost and tariff barriers. So both places have large import tariffs on electronics, and certainly in the case of India, at least until very recently, if you bought from one of our distributors, your unit was drop shipped to you from Singapore. So you were paying courier charges from Singapore. Both of our distributors are working very hard to crack both of those. They kind of got the low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit was the UK. The middle-hanging fruit was the rest of Europe and North America, and they're now really starting to look at what they can do to get these out into South America and India, both of which are markets, I think, where we're going to see a mix of educational use and actual use as a general purpose computer. I think I've got one more slide. I said that we built these things in Shenzhen, because everything gets built in Shenzhen, right? As of about a month ago, we've been building the majority of Raspberry Pis in the UK. And we've been building them in the UK at the same price that we're able to build them in Shenzhen. This has been an absolute revelation. These are being built for us by Sony, right? It's not some random factory, it's Sony building these for us. I didn't even know until we started doing this project that Sony did electronic content manufacture. They've been able, by dint of a lot of tweaking of the design, to get it to a point where it is manufacturable at Chinese cost in the UK. And, I think this is the start of a trend, because I think that the numbers are only going one way, right? Chinese labour costs are only going one way. Shipment costs are only going one way. The strength of the Chinese currency is only going one way. I think we may actually, this gives me some indication, we may have crossed over the point at which it's worth building cheap value-engineered electronics in the Far East. I think we're going to see over the next 5 or 10 years a trend in moving a lot of this stuff back onshore, and it will be cheaper to do that than doing it in the Far East. And that's really encouraging, right? This lady's called Jane. She's one of 30 people who work full-time now in the UK building Raspberry Pis. And that for me is fantastic, because I was born about 10 miles away from here, and it's not the richest bit of the United Kingdom. So that's been, for me, certainly in the last few months, that's been it's been really one of the highlights for us. That's kind of all I've got, I think. The next year is really for us going to be about trying to see whether we can deliver on the Foundation's mission. The Foundation's registered mission with the Charities Commission in the UK is not to make a lot of small computers. The Foundation's registered mission is to get people programming again. And so really the next year for me is going to be about kind of trying to turn around and trying to do that as much as it is about trying to get more units out the door. And maybe in 2 or 3 years' time we'll start to get some idea of whether we're succeeding. So that's all I've got. I'm very happy to take questions. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, question. Actually, got me interested in here. The Raspberry Pi was. I've seen a lot of people putting it together as a media center, porting XBMC over. And that's actually why I eventually got one. And it's actually a very powerful device for the needs of the media center. But do you see that market being more integrated into what you guys are looking to do in the future?
Yeah, so there are 2 things I wish I'd put in this deck, and I've actually been on the road so much I haven't, since I realised that there were 2 things missing from this deck, I haven't had a chance to get pictures to go with them. One of them is Media Center now. This chip is a GPU basically with an ARM in the corner. And it does make a great media. It makes a great media center chip. We actually, when we got our first prototypes of Pi in August of last year, and from September of last year, there've been 2 units, and then later about 10 units with the XBMC core team. So yeah, we actually ended up prioritizing that because it was something that our software engineers were interested in doing with the device. So they begged units. They heard the XBMC guys heard. They got in touch with our software engineers. Our software engineers were enthusiastic. We allocated quite a substantial fraction of our prototype stream, and that meant that at the point where we launched, XBMC was very stable and mature on the platform. Yeah, it does. So yeah, I think it's something that we're certainly going to keep focusing on. I think that the Model A, which is the 25, so the strapline on our website says an ARM Linux box is $25. Now we're only selling the $35 version, so in the next couple of months we're going to backfill and start selling the Model A. I think the Model A will actually be that doesn't have the Ethernet, it doesn't have the USB, and I think that will actually be, it only has one USB. I think that will be a really nice platform for present stuff, because you can plug the Wi-Fi dongle into the one USB port, control it using CEC commands from your remote, and just glue it behind your TV and forget about it. So I think the Model A is going to be a real winner in that space.
So on that same front, have you heard any more momentum on picking up Flash support for it? Right, I know that the GNU Nash runs, but it does the software palette conversion, and it's very painful.
Yeah, Flash is problematic because I'm in Adobe and basically thrown under a bus, right? So certainly Flash on ARM, Adobe have pretty much thrown under a bus. It's very, very hard for us to get to make much progress there. We have now got to the point, it is a profitable business making Raspberry Pis. We do have some limited supply of funding to spend on making targeted things. Flash is on that list. Getting Scratch performance up is on that list. Getting our general composition and rendering performance up is on that list, and X acceleration. And I think Flash is probably on there as well. So yeah, fingers crossed. We have a company who we're talking to about doing that.
So I can see the value in because of the price point and the size, but why do you think there's so many people using the beer controllers when a full purpose CPU might be a little bit more easier?
I think the GPIO is a big draw. I mean, you can get a PC, then you've got to put a card on it in order to get some GPIO. I think there's a lot of people quite like just having those GPIO lines that they can look on it. I don't know. I think that people are. There is a very cost-sensitive bit of the world. One interesting thing that I think we were talking about earlier before the talk was there are a lot of little industrial verticals in the world which are currently served by very specialist pieces of hardware. Factory automation bits of the world. digital signage is a great example of this. You know, the digital signage world is composed of very large numbers of companies which are effectively taking small form factor PCs and gluing them on the back of televisions and selling them at a markup. Now, there's no reason why you would want to use any platform other than Raspberry Pi for digital signage. It's better than most of those platforms in terms of its media capabilities. So I think there's lots of these little industrial verticals that we characterize these as being platforms which talk to a display, talk to a network, talk to some sensors and actuators, and do two of those three things, at least two of those three things. I think all of those that are currently served by special purpose hardware may be better served by the Pi. So I think it's going to be very disruptive in those areas.
So you think the GPIO element kind of lends it more to an embedded system than a general purpose?
Yeah, so I think that's where it's strongest. It's people who are very cost sensitive, people who need GPIO integrated on the board, and so cost sensitive can be either you're just cost sensitive, or cost sensitive can be you're going to do such a vast deployment that a small dollar saving on each device will. We think because they have no moving parts. Actually, there's a fairly compelling compared at least to anything that's got a fan. So maybe not compared to I guess a micro ITX or something, but compared to a proper PC that's got a fan and maybe a hard drive. It's got there's a good TCO story as well. There's a good total cost of ownership story around it. Yes.
I noticed on your site and the latest versions of the operating system that you're encouraging experimentation with overclocking.
Indeed.
And I just wondered if you've run into any heat problems or anything like that.
That's an interesting question. We haven't run into any heat problems. You can make the chip run a little hotter by overclocking the CPU. The interesting thing though about the die is that the CPU accounts, because it's a GPU, the CPU accounts for about 3% of the area of the die. So if you quadruple the power consumption, you do virtually nothing to the temperature of the die as a whole. There is a question as to whether, obviously, when you push up the voltage and get yourself more overclocking headroom, you pull up the power consumption of the entire chip. We've been able to measure about a 5-degree difference in temperature. So you go from the chip being 45 degrees to 50 degrees at the surface of the package, and we're fairly comfortable with that. We are, I think, probably for the educational release, going to do a little bit of work to bring down the power consumption of the platform as a whole, just because we like it to be a little bit cooler. There are in some countries standards around the temperature that things that can get into the hands of children should be at. We probably try and moderate that a little bit. Otherwise, you have to case it.
What about heat sinking?
So people have been selling heat sinks, and they look really kick-ass with these heat sinks on. It's kind of pointless. You don't really accomplish anything, but like I say, we have it when we introduced the overclocking functionality. We introduced the thermal cutout as well, just to be on the safe side, which disables the overclocking. Whatever overclocking you've requested gets disabled if the temperature of the die, as distinct from the temperature and surface of the package, goes above 85 degrees Celsius. We have never been able in UK ambient conditions to get the temperature, running the heaviest stress benchmark we've got, to get the temperature above 75. Now, obviously, if you go and run that in the desert, Nevada or somewhere, you'll be able to trip the thermal cutout. So yeah, I think heat sinking possibly in really extreme environments might be a possibility, but I think at the moment, I think at the moment it's a style. People who are heat sinking them is a style statement, and obviously a lot of stuff around extreme overclocking is about style more than it's about performance.
For pedagogical use, have you looked at Alice or Logo, those kinds of things?
People have certainly been running Logo on there.
Gotcha.
I think Logo is a really good starting point for people, because it gives you
right.
It's another thing like Scratch, which gives you that kind of instant graphical feedback without having to write a big infrastructure to give you graphical feedback. You're pretty much 10 seconds in, you've got something on the screen.
It seems like Alice might work too. I don't know if you.
I'm not a.
It's
I've heard of it, but I don't.
It allows you to sort of script, real quickly create a graphical scene, and then you can animate various entities in that scene using control structure.
That's where I've come. That's where I've come across this. There is there's the University of Manchester in the UK run a computer animation contest as a proxy for programming, and this is one of the platforms they support. So they support Flash and they support Scratch, and I believe they support Alice as well. That's where I've heard of it. So it's popular in the UK. It's another thing where perhaps we might need to do these tools like Scratch and Alice have been written with multi-gigahertz desktop PCs in mind.
Right.
So they're slow on the Pi, not because they need to be slow, but just because no one's never been worth anyone's while optimizing them before. So it may be that may be another one where we want to throw a little bit of some dollars to try and improve its performance.
More interested in real-time sound synthesis, and I know this is kind of a funny question to ask, basically, given the history of the chip, but is there anything that you could suggest in terms of trying to take away, or any resources available that you could take away from the graphics side? Really going to have no need for those,
Yes.
and maybe bump up some of the real-time stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned we have a 700 megahertz ARM11 on there, or gigahertz when you overclock it, ARM11. And that can retire a floating point instruction per cycle, probably a Mac. So you probably have a GMAC at a gigahertz. You probably have a single precision GMAC available to you of a floating point. The GPU has 12 GMACs of performance available, and so it dwarfs the CPU in terms of floating point throughput. We are planning to. It is perfectly. I was on the GPU design team, and one of the things that we targeted was being able to bring that floating point performance out to the user. We are hoping very much to be able to provide a set of tools for people to write general purpose GPU code. And that's why I think that synth application, 4-note polyphony, fairly simple synth application, when finished, will be able to will turn into a 16-note polyphony, much more sophisticated synth.
That type of development is getting pushed back to the entire community, or is that type of stuff being licensed for?
That will be pushed to the entire community.
Yeah,
so the intention is, we will generally what we try and do with something like that is to have like a poster child, to have some like motivating example or one or two motivating examples that where we work closely with the developer to give them the support that they need to expose the support they need. And particularly if you've picked two quite disparate ones and you can come up with something that satisfies them, you've got a good chance that you've made something which is generalizable. We'll probably support the synth. We also may want to support software radio. Is another software radio decode is another really good example. You can get these USB dongles which have a down mixer and a fast A to D on them, and we're kind of interested in whether you can demodulate, EVB or something using using the GPU. So we will get there. Won't be OpenCL. I heard the OpenCL word. It won't be OpenCL. It will be a much lower assembler level of interaction, but reasonably programmable with some example code. So people who really want that performance can bring it out.
Why the name Raspberry Pi?
Why the name? Raspberry is fruit name computer companies like Tangerine and Apricot and Acorn, in fact, as well, who made the BBC Mine. Pi was because I said that we went through this journey from like making very fixed kind of programming only toys to being general purpose computers, and partway along the way there we had a thing that ran on a Broadcom. It wasn't Atmel anymore. It was running on a Broadcom graphics chip. It was a Broadcom graphics chip without an ARM. So we had a port of CPython, the Python interpreter, directly onto the GPU, and the thing booted into Python. And so the Pi in Raspberry Pi is the Pi in Python. We froze that, and it was misspelled because we wanted to have that Pi symbol. We thought that would be a really nice graphical design element, which in the end we haven't made any use of. We ran a contest, a load of people submitted examples that had Pi characters in. They all looked incredibly forced, and so we didn't even, I think, shortlist anything with a Pi symbol, let alone use it. So that's where we got that from. So we kind of froze the name of the foundation and by implication the name of the device. before we froze the design of the device. The device then moved on and became more flexible. But I hated the name for the first year. It was designed by committee, and I've come to love it. But I had about a year of thinking, well, that was a nice idea. It's a lovely idea shaking out the name.
This may betray my status as a real novice, but what if you took the Model A and just put on like a $6 USB hub to that one USB port?
That would work. So effectively, that's what a Model B is. Model B is effectively a Model A with a hub chip on it and an Ethernet. It's this really nice chip from the same guys who make the PIC, a microcontroller, which is it's effectively a 3-port USB hub with one of those ports tied off internally to a USB Ethernet controller that's also on the same die. And then what comes to one USB in, 2 USBs out, and an Ethernet out. And that's a really nice, highly integrated chip that gives us all the things missing from the main SoC. Yeah, if you want to put for a variety of reasons, if you do want more than 2, a Model A is actually quite a good choice, because you can have one big hub rather than our little hub and then another hub strung off that hub. So.
Yes. You mentioned that moving the manufacturing to the United Kingdom, you think might be a growing trend.
Yes.
If the city of Charleston came to you and said, what lessons did you learn about trying to take a manufacturing product like this and moving it to Charleston or somewhere else? What would you say?
I guess what did we learn? Obviously, taking labour out is important. One of the interesting things about building stuff in the Far East and building it, you get. I did an MBA at the university in Cambridge fairly recently, and they took us to China for a field trip. And one of the things that people there were saying, went to a GM Shanghai Automotive joint venture. One of the things they were saying is when you offshore manufacture to the Far East, you get kind of 2 benefits. You get half the benefit you get by simply moving your existing factory and its existing work to the Far East because you pay the people less. That only captures half the benefit. The other benefit you get is by then wherever you're manufacturing, you make some decisions about the trade-off between capital and labour. You decide how much you're going to spend on automation in order to save yourself some labour costs. Now, if you port an American factory to the Far East, those settings will have been set based on American labour costs. When you go to the Far East, it makes sense to do less capital investment and just spend more on people. Or spend less, have more people because you can spend less on them. And that rebalancing is the second part of the benefit. So in terms of moving stuff back from China to it's exactly the same. You move it back and then you have to reset the balance. So a lot of we had our first meeting with Sony in April. We didn't start volume manufacturing until the end of August. And almost all of that time was taken up by, they have a very capable test engineering team, because test is most of the manual interaction right here, because the actual assembly is done by robots. So it doesn't matter whether those robots are in a factory in China or a factory in the UK. You may have different environmental standards maybe, but that's really going to be the only difference. So test, handling and test is the only thing that really varies. And so they have a very good test engineering team who work at taking labour out of the equation. So one good example, and a completely trivial example of this previous. See this here? There are 6, you can count the yellow bits, there are 6 pies in a panel. When these are manufactured in China, they're manufactured 2 up. They're panelised 2 up. In Wales, they're panelised 6 up. We may in fact try and panelise even more, because that means that simply the act of carrying pies around the factory is 3 times lower labour. And so it's a lot of things like that. So that would be one thing. I think the other thing is currently the other thing that militates in favour of building in the Far East is that the component supply chain is set up to support building in the Far East. So, it's not just your building in the Far East, but all your component manufacturers are in the Far East as well. And your guy who runs your factory knows a bunch of component guys and can call them up and get favours. And that was one of the reasons why initially our little CM, the Chinese CM for Raspberry Pi, their main business is making MP3 players for Walmart. And they have some spare line capacity able to use Rasp. One of the reasons they were able to be both cheaper and shorter lead time than a UK CM was because they had the component supplier relationships. So a lot of effort in moving this back to Wales, a lot of effort has gone into optimizing that supply chain. In particular, obviously Sony are a great choice, right? Because they've got a whole global, they build vast numbers of bits of electronics. They've been able to get a lot of components very easily. But there's been work has gone on to largely between Sony and our partners. So this is a three-way relationship between the foundation, Farnell, our manufacturing distribution partner, and Sony. And there's been a lot of work between Farnell and Sony in getting that bond down. One of the things that's really helped us is that Farnell are an electronic component distributor. So so you have two organisations, Sony and Farnell, both of whom are very good at sourcing. And that's been probably for us the thing that's let us get over the barrier. Neither of them on their own was able to hit the bill of materials target. But the two of them together by basically going through a 100-line bill of materials and saying, what have you got for this? What have you got for an HDMI socket? What have I got for an HDMI socket? Taking the min on each line, it turned out that that bill of materials was as cheap as the Chinese one. So it's work on the BOM, work on the assembly cost, taking labour out. Because those are the two things.
You say you price these things in US dollars because that's what your suppliers are priced in.
Yes. Yes.
But you're billing in China and Great Britain?
Well, we were building it in China. Chinese just price in dollars. And then, okay, now we're building in Britain. In fact, we'd again negotiate in dollars because all of the bill of materials. So the bill of materials accounts for the Model B bill of materials accounts for about 80% of the final manufacturing cost. So it's still the case, even building in the UK, it's dominated by dollar denominated stuff rather than sterling denominated. Anyone else? Ooh, yes.
So with the whole mission of education, we've got a number of volunteers in the room that work with. Have you heard of First Robotics?
I have. It's the Dean Kamen thing. Yeah?
Yep, it's the Dean Kamen thing, and we've got about teams in the area. We've also we've got that going on, and we've also got a program where we've been working with One Laptop Per Child, and we did this summer program where we got groups of kids together and said, let's make some educational video games for the Exos. And we found, or at least I found, that when the students are in a social setting where you're encouraging and you put professionals in there, and the same thing we found in First Robotics, that they tend to just go with it. They tend to really get into it and really get excited. Is there any, that social aspect I think is a key driver in getting kids going, getting them into it. Is there anything that the foundation is looking at working in things like First Robotics that has a huge audience, or One Laptop Per Child, to really get this out there?
Yeah. So I still work for Broadcom, and I was in DC yesterday. I was in DC until yesterday. On Tuesday morning, Broadcom sponsors a thing called Masters, which is it's a project of the Society for Science and the Public. So it's the baby version of the Intel High School Science Fair stuff, ISEF. And it's basically middle school kids, 30 best science fair projects for middle school kids, and they all get together in Washington for a final for these finals. And we were doing that early this week, and after they'd finished, not as part of their competition, but as a sort of kind of winding down on the last day, on Tuesday morning, we put these 30 kids in 6 teams of 5 in a room with a mentor with each team, and gave them a copy of Snake, the very, written in Python, and said, you've got an hour, do something interesting. And you should have seen them. I mean, I was barely, they cut me off when I was talking to them at the start. They just piled in and started hacking. Hardly any of these kids had ever written any Python, right? Only a very small number of them had ever done any programming. But like you say, the social environment meant, and the presence of a mentor meant, and in this case, the presence of a partly written piece of software meant that they could make very, very rapid progress, and that they were enthusiastic about it. So at the end of an hour, not only had all 6 of them done cool stuff, all 6 of them had done 6 completely different cool things. So we had a multiplayer, and we had we had a multiplayer version, we had a thing with several targets to pick up instead of one, some of which were holograms, and like little hidden black holes that killed you, and poison apples, and a load of, and lots of like colour scheme, lots of graphical improvements, lots of improvements to the look and feel of the thing. And this was, admittedly extremely bright kids. I mean, some really, really talented kids, but who'd never programmed before. And in fairness, with some mentors who, were not Python specialists. So yeah, that sort of thing we do like. The foundation has limited ability has limited resource and ability to do this stuff. What we are doing is we are encouraging the creation of teaching material which emphasises that aspect. In particular, we're interested in, there is some work going on to produce teaching material which encourages people to see it as a creative, see computing as a creative rather than purely technical subject, which there's some evidence is useful in retaining interest in from girls from sort of 11 upwards. There's this kind of forking off, and you can retain people's interest if you make it clear that it's not just maths. You know, that there's a strong craft. There's a strong craft element to it. There's a strong maker kind of thing. So yeah, we're doing our best with the limited resources we have. We do realise that is a big thing.
In that same vein, I don't know what the situation is in the UK, but when summer comes, when summer comes to a place like Charleston, every kid wants to go to some kind of camp that's either air conditioned or up in the mountains, and you know.
Yeah, we don't generally have the hot weather problem in the UK.
Right.
You know, but generally they want to go to any kind of camp that's indoors and waterproof.
Just dry.
Yeah, just dry. They just want to get out of the rain.
Well, you know, computer camps used to be really expensive because it took such an enormous hardware investment to provide a computer to every kid. But you know, it strikes me that something like the Raspberry Pi would be a perfect fit for, particularly for young children.
Yeah, I think this is somewhere where our UK background might betray us, because we genuinely don't have the summer camp culture in the UK. We're aware of it from consuming American media, but unlike, say, Halloween, which over the course of my lifetime has gone from being nothing to being a thing everyone does, you know, summer camp hasn't really taken off yet. And so that's an example of a place where I think that, you know, our focus on the UK way of doing education means that we might miss out on that opportunity. But I think, yeah, there is real benefit. And the nice thing is, you know, there's nothing you can do on a Pi that you can't do with sufficient effort on a regular desktop computer, but they are cheaper, and they're cheaper enough. They have the interfacing thing, which turns out to be surprisingly popular with kids. They are cheap enough that generally, like when we did this thing on Tuesday morning, at the end of the session, the kids all just walked away with the hardware they've been using. And
right.
You can do that, and that was a whole $1,000. That was a $1,000 expenditure to get 30 kids a computer. And so I think there's value in that. One of the reasons I think there's value in kids having these things is the same way there's value in kids having their own musical instrument, because you've got kind of formal teaching, which is structured in a small number of hours a week, and then practice, which is informal and a vast number of hours a week. And so having that same platform that can apply to both of those and having a uniform common platform is handy. Yeah, I like the summer camp.
Well, and again, in the United States, I mean, in the summertime, you've got hundreds of thousands of classrooms like this one that are just sitting there empty.
Yeah.
Not necessarily this one, but you know, particularly public schools, all of them are empty.
So is there infrastructure like for kids, like if I want to give my nephews a bunch of Raspberry Pis for Christmas, you know, is there like if I just Google like YouTube videos for kids programming on this, is that like a thing I can do?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, you know, we have a forum. We have a website, and it's Liz is involved in organising that, and it's very welcoming. It's heavily moderated.
And for like kids and stuff, right?
Yeah, for kids and stuff. And we have had kids. We've had kids turn up on the forum, and get genuinely useful, non-sarcastic help, which is. It's nice. And we just hate the idea that someone might like reach out for help and just get like stamped on, and then that's it. That's that person out computing for life. So you know, we do a lot of work to make sure that doesn't happen.
So have you seen any kind of general curriculum sort of forming around the Pi, right? Because I mean, I know you've got like the tutorials for Scratch that you can run, right? You've got tutorials for Python that you can run, but how about sort of a general? Here's all the topics you can cover with this platform.
Yeah. So. The books are kind of helpful in that respect. Set up and pin. There is some stuff in there about it.
And they're cheap.
Yeah. So we at the moment, what we have is the curriculum. It's the usual problem or feature of open source software. But what you have is the stuff that someone found interesting. So, for example, we have some tutorials on Scratch. We have some tutorials on Pygame, written by different people. They're not very uniform in the presentation. We have probably our most structured and impressive bit of curriculum material is for writing a bare metal operating system in ARM assembly. And it's really nice. It was done for us by a summer student. Done for us by a summer student at the university who we took on with some money we had from Google. It's wonderful, but of course it's this one little, it's got this one little delta of awesomeness, which is kind of unrelated to, actually, I would think a 14-year-old kid, a bright 14-year-old kid could follow it and go all the way through and learn how to write an operating system. But, we are doing work to try and fill in. One of the really important pieces of work we're doing is there's an organisation called Cambridge Assessment in the UK who are an exam board. We have 3 major exam boards. So examinations in the UK are provided by private companies, and the schools select which private company to buy their exam services from. I think if you think you can spot what the problem with this is, right? And in general, the system's a bit of a disaster. But fortunately, Cambridge Assessment, they're based in Cambridge. They are, I believe, the best of the exam boards. They are not-for-profit. The interesting thing about them is that they see everything other than doing exams as being a promotional activity. The exams is where they make their money. Everything else is a promo. What that means is that they can do curriculum material and give it away. And so they're looking at doing some curriculum material around the Pi, and that would be kind of K through 12. So that would really cover a very, very broad spectrum. Maybe not so much down the K end, but certainly everything from middle school up to 12.
Cool.
Yes.
So my interest is also educational wise. Thinking about the summer camp as well. How long a lead time should we already placed an order for 20 because we go around in business schools and work with their science clubs and whatnot, and help them stand one up if they don't have one.
No.
How long a lead time should because I can see that, like for a summer camp having the parents have to pre-order their pie.
Yeah.
How long?
By summer it'll be 0 with both distributors. Right now it's of the order of 0 with one of the 2 distributors. So in the US, Newark and Allied, for a variety of internal technical reasons which are not either of our distributors' fault.
Is that A and B? Is that Model A and Model B?
No, certainly Model A, Model B will be fully available. At the moment, only Model B is available, and the lead time with Allied is very long, and that's created a perception that Raspberry Pi is in short supply. There are subtle technical reasons why Allied's lead times have blown up. Newark's lead times have been at about 2 days for about a month now. They've actually crept up again. They're in the middle of a planned shortage. They have, for the last 5 days, they've been accumulating backlog. They will continue to accumulate backlog until a week on Monday, until the 15th, and then they will ship. They'll be back to 2 days from the 15th. But then, again, internal technical reasons to that, associated with this, actually, associated with some of the mechanics of moving the manufacturer around. So even now, I was at Maker Faire in New York at the weekend. O'Reilly bought 1,000 Raspberry Pis just as a regular consumer, not some special deal. They just bought 1,000 Raspberry Pis and sold them at Maker Faire. So you can buy 1,000 Raspberry Pis if you want. And if you want to buy 50,000 Raspberry Pis, then there will be a delay. Any number under 5,000 is pretty much just, they're making about 4,000 or 5,000 a day. So any number under 5,000 would just end up in the noise. But 20 is fine.
So one play is to help create some kind of curriculum too. So
Yes.
certainly
Yeah.
The site, but
And help is always very welcome in creating curriculum material. We are I guess the difference between us and one laptop per child is one laptop per child bundles you get a pedagogy with your laptop, right? It bundles a constructivist learning pedagogy, which is fine, but isn't necessarily what everyone wants. And so we've tried very consciously to there's nothing educational about this, right? It's just a cheap Unix box. But we have tried very hard to stick to that. and to not take a stance on what the right pedagogy is. And so any material that gets generated, we will promote as an option to people.
Do you have any plans to develop, I know you touched on this briefly about other boards, but the ribbon cables that you have on the board?
Yes. So there are two connectors on the board, two FPC connectors on the board. These two guys here. This one's a camera interface, a two-lane MIPI CSI2 camera interface. This one is a MIPI. This one's a MIPI DSI display interface. The camera board that I just showed you there, that's a 14 megapixel camera that dangles off that connector. 14 megapixel sensors are, particularly 14 megapixel active focus sensors are expensive. 5 megapixel fixed focus sensors are cheap as chips. So we are in the process of, and I've seen first life from a 5 megapixel board, and that's the one that we hope to be able to do at $25, in the $25 range, let's say. On the display side, we want to do a display board. So the only two expansion boards the foundation will do are the camera board, which is already in design, the display board, which we have selected chip vendors for, but not yet started doing layout on. The fiddling, and what the display board will do is it will give you a bridge from the DSI world to the LVDS world. And generally, if you buy a mid-sized panel from China, it'll have an LVDS interface. The annoying thing about them is they all have different ribbon cable formats. So what we're going to do is, our current plan is our display board will have the footprints for about 10 different, 10 of the most common LVDS connectors. You will buy one of these and the appropriate connector and solder it down, because they're generally just about hand solderable. And that will give you, so you get your Chinese panel, look at the data sheet, pick the right connector, put it together, and it should just work. Hopefully the end of the year kind of time.
End of this year?
Yes. Certainly camera, we need to get camera, because camera is going to be really great. Because particularly camera is going to tie in with some of that DSP stuff I was talking about, right? You've got a camera platform, the image processing, generally the sensor and the optics are not fantastic in the cell phone camera module, and so what you have is a lot of silicon which is devoted to taking out the awfulness of that. You have this tuned silicon which will take out the optical and sensor noise problems. We have that, and this is probably the best chip in the world for doing mobile phone camera stuff at the moment. So alongside that, you've got a bunch of DSP on the same die. So we see that there's a lot of there's a lot of potential applications in having those two things and low power consumption in one place. It's a big deal for us.
Is memory at all constraining, or is that sufficient?
So we currently have 256 megabytes of memory. I think it's sufficient for the applications that we have at the moment. It'd be lovely to have more memory.
Sure.
I mean, Moore's Law, I think we can appeal to Moore's Law. I think Moore's Law will get us there eventually. We're not there yet. But I think we will get there on memory.
Mainly, I guess I was asking if you found that there were a lot of things or at least enough things that you wanted to do that were sort of memory constrained, but it sounds like... I think
that it's actually the things on the general purpose computer side. It's as we've moved away from it's an educational toy.
Correct.
To you want to run a web browser. I mean, web browsers are a appalling piece of software, right? They're very, very memory hungry. They're often quite memory leaky. And so as we've moved away from into this new place, we found that we are getting constrained on memory. A lot of people are using, you share that memory between the GPU and the CPU.
Right.
If all you want to do is run X Windows, we have this kind of extreme, we have 256 meg memory, we have this extreme partition that gives you 240 for the CPU,
right.
16 for the GPU. And so a lot of people find themselves running with that configuration. It would be lovely to be able to fit more memory on that. I think that 512 is the very most that we could ever envisage, and that's going to be driven by when RAM costs come into our line.
You mentioned like some of the getting into some of the interesting 3D graphics. I can see that chopping off more of that memory on the graphics side. And
so people who are running Xbox Media Center, for example, are running with 128, 128 partition. That's the extreme partition.
So if the camera, does that video with that feed just kind of export into whatever you plug into the USB? Like, I mean.
So the camera feed is exported to the operating system on the device,
Okay.
whence you can do whatever with it you want. We have an H.264 encoder on there, so we have hardware accelerated JPEG encode. That'll do about 100 megapixels of JPEG, 100 megapixels a second of JPEG encode. So 5 megapixels in theory, you should be able to encode about 20 foot of motion JPEG, which is pretty cool. And obviously you can bin the frames so you can get to 30 foot that way. H.264 we can do 1080p 30 real time H.264 encode on the device, and that's going to be kind of fun.
The application that I work with. I'm on the board for a historical site, and I work with Makelab in developing ways that we can preserve records in the archives here. And this is a national problem, actually an international problem, with archives not being digitized. And so I'm seeing this as a possible future solution for some of the ways in which we're thinking of digitizing documents.
So with a look-down camera.
Yeah, we have a whole setup thing that we're working with, but this seems like a very interesting possibility.
Yeah, and I wonder actually whether at some point we may return to we've kind of put 14 megapixels on one side. I do wonder whether for applications like that we might find ourselves going back to we've actually used this, there's a phone called the Nokia 808, which is a 42 megapixel camera phone that was launched at Mobile World Congress this year, and that uses this chip. That's 42 megapixels is an amazing amount of resolution. So for that sort of example, if you've got bright light and 42 megapixels resolution, it could be a really interesting platform.
And low cost.
Yes, that sensor isn't. It's just in that world, the sensor would dwarf the cost of the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, but if we could take a bunch of pictures with the crappy sensor, I mean, we're fine. We can use software on our side to
stitch it. So maybe the 5 or 14 megapixel points are better for that sort of thing, and then you just do multi.
Because bright light can also damage your documents.
Flash. That's bright blue flash. Yes, lots of blue photons blowing up chemical bonds in your dyes. Yes.
While that camera board isn't out yet, can you use a regular webcam?
You can use a regular webcam with it. There's a list. elinux.org has a list of supported regular webcams. Our USB. I mean, if there's the most problematic, historically the most problematic section of the platform has been our USB support. There are some USB cameras which do really alarming USB stuff and which will trip up our USB driver. But there's a growing list. There is a supported growing list of supported USB camera devices. And say that space example, the space picture was taken with a USB webcam, a Raspberry Pi with a USB webcam attached. We're hoping to provide him with an early Model A and an early 5 megapixel one, so that he can go and shoot some, get the weight down. Get those extra 8 meters, because he was 8 meters short of 40 kilometers. So if we can get the weight down a bit, he can go a little bit higher.
Are the GPIO pins port addressable from the processor? I'm working on a very low-cost spectrum analyzer, and looking at that high digital data rate in.
Yes.
Can I port address those and get them directly into memory?
Yeah. What sort of frequency do you want?
I'm looking at. I'd love to be really fast, but right now I'm sticking myself in FM, so I'm sitting at 60 megahertz at the high end, or megasamples per second.
Yeah, I think you could probably get to 16. Thinking about the round trip time. Round trip time is about 16 megahertz would be the microsecond. So you've got a microsecond for a megahertz. So you've got might be a little bit tight. You've probably got about 100 nanoseconds of loop in the system. So it's hard to issue enough reads. That might actually be somewhere where when we bring out the GPU support, the GPU is actually able to do much higher rate. You can rig a DMA up to do it. That's it. You can rig a DMA up to just poll the GPIO, so you can just set a DMA controller up to just scream along, grabbing stuff out of the GPIO be done. I mean, it's one of those things that you do. I think if you try to do that, what you do is you end up on our forums a lot, talking to guys who've done similar stuff a lot, probably guys who work for Broadcom a lot.
It's that or designing my own FPGA
Yeah.
script and HDLs.
Yeah, so I think you could probably do something like that. Yeah, that'd be great to add to the list of stuff that you can do better with the Raspberry Pi than other stuff. What else? You done? Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, guys. It's really very much appreciated. Oh, yes. Hackspace. Just to put in the pile of stuff. I mean, you have a hackspace.
Yes.
Hackspace, you don't have a pile of stuff. If you have any, it's a little tiny bit. Just so that you can want to read more money. I am. Patrick Clarkson. Hey.
Great. Pretty heavy load, isn't it? Full time. So are you still doing any work at sorry, no. EOC? Just a summer thing?
Just on the,
I did it like 6 months. It's like a year ago.
Yeah. Everybody come to Bar Camp on November 10th. It's a cool thing to do. I love Raspberry Jam.
So I work 20 hours a week creating a program. Right now? Yeah. Chris. Oh, okay. Random kind of stuff. Programming 21.
I don't think that there is a significant increase in loads. Where's the
Well, we're gonna have Bar Camp. It's a user generated. So if somebody wants to like,
So I just check them on their
how
comments.
one's
Yeah,
I just put cards up there.
I think I didn't actually post them.
I don't know where the
I haven't read what actually downloaded it. Just
And as user generated, we put some started. I think that's in here. User generated in the morning, run pitches, there's sessions, and then we make the conference session. We want to make last people, we want to excuse real bad. So we would love to like every time I was
Lately, like the idea. That was the looper.
you know what they should do? They should
Any good?
Yeah,
you always learn more when you keep something. Yeah,
I don't know what comes out. I didn't get to see Batman twice.
Because they said it lacks
I was very excited.
So I mean, make it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm really, I see FM radio.
Yeah.
Deregulated.
Nothing.
I see, people using the USB dongle.
So
You out of here? Yeah, I think so. I think my class. Yeah. During this time, yeah. Class got